I'm going to start to take a session on the Unit 1, that is drama, with a different variety, with a different kind of content which is needed for the students for the 2022 examination. I always tell students that this UGC NET examination keeps on changing its interface. So I always try to have interaction with the students and with the papers so that you may be able to get the best out of it, students. So this is drama Unit 1, and this session which will be very fruitful for the UGC NET, yes, as well, because this is UGC NET drama Unit 1, as well as for the IAS aspirants who have the history of English literature as its background, which starts from the period of Renaissance. Then it is also needed for the GIC, PGT, LT, MA English entrance, PhD entrance, PCS and other examinations as well. So now students, concentrate on this lecture and just give your comments if you like this class on drama. And I am very much sure that once you like this, you will be able to focus and download the application of OSN Academy from the Play Store. And there are 14-15 verticals of English literature. जो भी vertical आपके career के लिए आपको suit करता है, you can join and you can even contact me with the phone numbers given on the screen. Fine. See, drama as it is written here. In drama, students, what happened that the fully developed British drama का मतलब ही होता है as far as Unit 1 is concerned, which is known as the British drama, students. British, to be very precise. So the fully developed British drama had its forerunners, where in the mystery, miracle, morality and interludes, where the British drama had its forerunners in the, note it down, in the mystery, miracle, morality and interlude, all very, very primitive types of dramatic entertainment, but all of which played a very significant part in the establishment of the dramatic tradition in England. Though they may be very, primitive types, but I'm very sure about this thing that you must always be knowing, and if you don't know, you should know that these played a very, very significant role in establishing the dramatic tradition in England. From the Middle Ages till the arrival of Tudor dynasty, till the arrival of Tudor kings, the mystery, students, was a very, very popular form of entertainment. It was a very popular form of entertainment which owed its origin to the attempts of the church for what? To preach the gospels of religion through some form of entertainment. Yes, and in the mystery, the biblical stories, don't forget, in the mystery, the biblical form of, the entertainment, the biblical stories were very much dramatically presented between, you can say, the dramatic historians do not make any distinction between the mystery and the miracle, and point out how these two names were ascribed to almost same type of religious performance. And students, this term miracle was also very, very popular in the Middle Ages, and the miracle plays were dramatic representations. What were their, students? DR में लिख देता हूँ. They were dramatic representations, and yes, don't forget, based on sacred history, based on sacred history, based on sacred history, students, or the legends of the Christian saints, legends of the Christian saints. We do not know whether these performances were the spontaneous expression of the dramatic instinct and were staged for their own sake, or were taken merely as interludes between the church songs sung on the festival occasions. And the miracle came to England from, France, and in the 14th century, the popular miracles were regularly performed in the different towns. But by the 15th centuries, by the 16th centuries, the miracles had attained their fullest development. And to tell you something new, a miracle was supervised by the corporation of a town, and the acting was shared by the members of the different guilds of craftsmen. Guilds की spelling होगी students, GUILDS, guilds of craftsmen. And they acted on a wheeled movable stage. वो किस पे एक्ट करते थे? They acted on a wheeled, जिसमें व्हील लगी होती थी, and that stage used to move. And each scene contained about a couple of 100 lines, and one scene differed from another in what terms, students? In terms of meter, in terms of rhetoric. And yes, these plays were performed at festival days. A very remarkable feature of the miracle was its inclusion of the humorous elements, which influenced the inclusion of comic by play and the comic episodes in the later romantic and the tragic play. As far as the morality is concerned, the morality was as popular as the miracle, and its prevalence in England can also be traced back to the Middle Ages. The morality plays were dramatic pieces in verse. Unlike the miracle, the morality plays did not have themes which were centering around the biblical sayings. But don't forget that on the other hand, there were personified abstractions. And what are these personified abstractions, students? आप बता सकते हैं? These personified abstractions were vices and virtues, yes. And the action of these plays were very simple and edifying. The 15th century was the most glorious period for the morality plays, and they developed side by side with the miracles. So this session, students, would give you much more development in your mind as far as drama is concerned. And it was a very proud moment, students, when all India students, they called me on the 1st of December after the examination and told me that, sir, the content which you have taught in the class was so amazing that they have got 60 plus questions, 60% questions from the only class content, which was also a very happy moment for me to know about this fact from the students. This is basically experience, and that is why I always tell students to study the best, because the content has to be very rich whether you go for any examinations. Now coming back to the point, there is still another variety of dramatic performances, which was that of the interlude. जो मैंने अभी मिटा दिया, it was the interlude. And the interlude basically came a little later than the morality, which had a very strong influence, which can be marked of the morality on the interlude. And what are interludes? You might be knowing. For those students who are not knowing, I will tell you that the interludes were short dramatic pieces. Short dramatic pieces. They were short dramatic pieces, students, dealing with brief episodes and evolving in a limited number of characters. We can compare them with the modern one-act plays. We can compare them with the one-act plays. Interludes were performed in the great baronial castles on very special occasions, usually to entertain the visiting dignitaries which used to come. And the tone of the interlude जो टोन होता है ना, that tone of the interlude was generally, secular. Through a few of them contained abstracted characters, and those abstracted characters, I will tell you, you must have even heard the name. बहुत बार एग्जाम में भी पूछा जाता है. John Haywood, the most celebrated writer of interludes, who substituted the human comedy of contemporary types for the allegory and instructive purpose of the morality. And his themes, students, were all, the borrowed ones, sometimes from Chaucer, sometimes from the French farcical stories. And with the passage of years, students, जब बहुत साल बीत गए, he enjoyed the patronage of King Henry VIII. King Henry VIII. He enjoyed the patronage of King Henry VIII, and later on Queen Mary. This person, Haywood's plays, Play of the Weather. आपने शायद नाम नहीं सुना होगा, Play of the Weather. Play of the Weather. Weather. And yes, of course, the 4 P's, 2 of the best interludes, which actually shows his cleverness in creating very, very interesting and humorous dramatic situations. Now, what happened? I'll tell you. With the passage of years, variations were introduced in the morality as well as in the interlude. Religious, political satire was introduced into the theme, and John Skelton's, a new name has come now, John Skelton's magnificence and Sir David Lindsley's Satire of the Three Estates. Satire of the Estates. ध्यान दीजिएगा. John Skelton's Magnificence and Sir David Lindsley's Satire of the Three Estates are supposed to be the notable extant, E-X-T-A-N-T, extant specimens of such plays. My dear students, now what happened that in some interludes, attempts were made to strike the new advances towards the comic drama. And all told, these forms actually kept alive the comic tradition. Comic tradition को इन्होंने alive रखा and introduced a new dramatic purpose by a progressive advance towards the realism and advance towards seriousness. Yes. So when this happened, the advance towards the realism and the seriousness happened, they also stimulated. इन्होंने क्या किया? They also stimulated the popular taste and paved, रास्ता बनाया, the ground for the better types to come. And the actors until the days of Shakespeare, however, did not enjoy any social status. So what they did? They had to thus seek the patronage of the nobility. उनको nobility की patronage लेनी पड़ती थी, and the companies and group of actors were formed, each styling itself as the company of some great lord or some member of the court. So these actors were often moved from town to town, from town to town, and performing before the provincial audiences, keeping alive the popularity of the age-old dramatic forms in the whole length and the breadth of the land. Now what happened in this unit, that is drama, I am trying to make you understand very pinpointed net eccentric and exam eccentric details so that you may have a great command over the subject. By the middle of the 16th century, students, the situation was very much ripe for a bold advance towards the full-fledged dramatic pieces. By this time already, the Renaissance had stimulated the people's taste in the comic plays of ancient Rome. The comedies of Plautus, Plautus, the comedies of Plautus. The famous Roman dramatist had become so popular in the learned circles, and the tendency was already afoot for the creation of comic plays in the English on the model of the Plautus. One more thing I have to tell you here, that it is very much interesting to note in this connection that the Comedy of Errors, one of the earliest of Shakespeare's comic plays in an adaptation of the comedy that is Menachmi by Plautus. So students, next is that the first full-length comic play in English. It came, yes, you might be knowing, in the year 1553. And what is the name of that first full-length comic play, students? Ralph Roister Doister. Ralph Roister Doister, 1553, by Nicholas Udall. This is the first full-length comic play, students. And this play by Nicholas Udall, and who is Nicholas Udall, students? You should also know this thing. He was a Latin scholar and also a former headmaster of the Eton school. Former headmaster of the Eton school. This play, Ralph Roister Doister, was performed by the boys of the Westminster School. Westminster School, WMS. This was performed by the boys of the Westminster School. And the play, Ralph Roister Doister, shows similarity to the comedies of Plautus. It shows the similarity to the comedies of Plautus and also the comedies of Terence, who is one of the other famous Roman comic dramatist of the past. Yet, we can be sure about thing that it breathes the British spirit through its story and through its characterization. Now, because we are nurturing you students with this Unit 1 drama, which is, we can say, the background of English literature, which is important for every aspirant of English literature student for any examination. Now here, apart from this Ralph Roister Doister, another comic play of the period was Gammer Gurton's Needle. I am teaching you from the very basic of it, so that the new students who are getting into various competitions, they may understand the quality and the in-depth study time to time. So another comic play of the period was Gammer Gurton's Needle. Gammer Gurton's Needle. Though many of you might be knowing. And suppose if somebody asked you who has written this play, so this is not known, unknown writer. कहीं पे आपको दिख जाए मिस्टर एस मास्टर ऑफ आर्ट्स, ऐसे करके कहीं दिख जाए, वैसे तो इसमें आता है ऐसे, इट इज रिटन बाय एन अननोन राइटर, लेकिन कभी आपको दिख जाए दैट मिस्टर एस मास्टर ऑफ आर्ट्स, तो समझ जाइएगा कि यही अननोन राइटर है जिसका नाम नहीं पता है. And this was also very popular for the amusement it provided to the audience. Why it became very popular, students? Because of the amusement it has provided to the bigger, larger number of audience. अब हम आगे बढ़ते हैं स्टूडेंट्स. चलिए अब आ गया कुछ साल बाद, few years later, if we talk about 1561 to 1562, for example, came the first full-length British tragic play, The Tragedy of Gorboduc. The full-length tragic play. But don't forget, it is written by two writers. These are things which has to be taught in the classroom, which I have been teaching in my classes past 24 years, whether it is offline or online. And that is why our students are very comfortable, because they know the basic and the entire detailing of what is to be asked in the various examinations. Though many of you might be knowing, but it is for the new students who are coming to the platform to understand where to study various examinations. So OSN Academy is a platform where, under my guidance, lakhs of students have made their career in the past 24 years. So students, you have to analyze that if you want quality education, you have to see the YouTube channel of OSN Academy, you see the application, you talk to me, and if you feel that yes, this is in originality enriching for you to make you something in the field of English literature, then you should bank upon my classes. So few years later, in 1561 or 62, if we talk about The Tragedy of Gorboduc, the first full-length tragic play written by two writers. And who are these two writers? Thomas Sackville. Thomas Sackville, who, यहाँ पे एक चीज और बता दें एग्जाम एसेंट्रिक, जो बाद में he became the Earl of Dorset. बाद में क्या बन गया वो? Earl of, he became the Earl of Dorset. And the second writer was Thomas Norton. And this play was presented by the young law students of the Inner Temple. किसने किया? The young law students of the Inner Temple, one of the Inns of Court to Queen, you can say Elizabeth, yes. So, as in the first English comedy, the Roman influence was clearly manifest. So, in Gorboduc, the influence of the Roman tragic dramatist Seneca was clearly to be recognized. यहाँ पे किसको हम recognize करते हैं? Seneca को, if we talk about Gorboduc. And this play was first acted in the hall of the Inner Temple. Hall of the Inner Temple. This is important, students. Hall of the Inner Temple, जहां पे पहली बार एक्ट हुआ है. And the theme of the play centers around some British legendary characters, and a political rivalry leads to insurrection in the kingdom, and a series of murders makes the situation very tense. But there is, however, no action on the stage. The events are simply narrated in blank words. This is also important, students. ये क्वेश्चन भी आ चुका है कि this play is written in blank words, this. So आपको अगर पता है तो तुरंत आप याद कर लेंगे कि सर ने बताया था कि that the events in this play are narrated in blank words, and the popularity of Gorboduc influenced the writers of the time to write similar tragic plays on the cynical model. Thus, before the arrival of Marlowe, जब तक Marlowe प्लेटफॉर्म पे नहीं आया था, स्टेज पे नहीं आया था, the stage was all set for the original tragic plays which are free from the slavish limitations of the cynical models. For example, Marlowe's Tamburlaine, published in 1587. And you must be knowing it was actually an epoch-making play because it brought to the popular drama true poetry and genuine passion. But this play and the successors established a new type of tragedy, and Marlowe made no effort to retain the structure and the themes of the classical tragedy. On the contrary, he made his plays loosely connected series of the scenes dealing with the life and the death of the hero, crowded with persons and with a startling action. और ऐसा करने में, students, he was conforming to the method of the dramatic narratives that pleased the theatre, जो theatre को please कर रहा था. But each play centers its dramatic interest on a mighty protagonist battling with his overwhelming desires and their inevitable disappointments. So, we can say that with the spectacle, with the sensation, with the absurdity, there is also dramatic structure. There is also tragic significance in the revelation of these protagonists. Their struggles, there is a word known as catastrophe. And these plays set the key for the Elizabethan tragedy, including Shakespeare's King Lear, Shakespeare's Othello, and yes, undoubtedly Macbeth. And now, my dear students, they were also immediately followed by a dozen of imitators. All the blank words echoed Marlowe's mighty lines, and the tragedy was filled with conquerors like Tamburlaine, like Barabbas, like the Edward II, and Shakespeare was his pupil in the second and third Henry IV. He mastered his methods in Richard III, and the Merchant of Venice, undoubtedly. So there is a lot, students, which has to be read as far as the drama is concerned. As I have just tried to make you understand that those students who wish to be performing their best in the world of literature, they have just to download the application from the Google Play Store, OSN Academy, and they will be amazed to see a platform like OSN, which has 14-15 verticals of English literature covering the pan-India examinations, with its syllabus, with its classes, with its proper system, with its proper PDFs, test series, and my particular personal guidance, grooming. So I am sure, students, you must have loved this session, and I hope that you will subscribe the channel, as well as you will comment on the box so that what next you need from Dr. Agarwal. Anurag Agarwal, and this is OSN Academy of English since 1998. Today we are going to start a new session, a new batch for the English literature aspirants. And the first lecture which I am going to take today is poetry, because in forms of literature there are 4 topics to be covered: poetry, drama, fiction and non-fiction. See, the first topic in detail which you have to study is poetry. And poetry, we all know, is a great thing because it inculcates lot many things which you have to command. I still remember the beautiful lines written by John Keats in his poem Ode to the Nightingale. And what are those lines? My heart aches and a drowsy numbness pains my sense as though of hemlock I had drunk. जॉन कीट्स ने कितनी खूबसूरत से इस लाइन को लिखा है. माई हार्ट एक्स, मेरा हृदय में दर्द होता है. माई हार्ट एक्स एंड अ ड्राउजी नमनेस पेन्स माई सेंस एज दो ऑफ हेमलॉक आई हैड ड्रंक. ऐसा लगता है जैसे हमने शराब पी रखी है. सो दिस इज द ब्यूटी ऑफ द पोइट्री रिटन बाय सच ग्रेट ऑथर्स. Students, I am sure you must be very much aware of the sublime beauty in these lines in the classical poems of the great poets. And why poetry, students, is so beautiful and sublime? Why this is so beautiful and even sublime? These are 2 great words. And what is sublimity? Sublimity is something which pleases all and pleases always. ऐसी चीज जो हमेशा आपको अच्छी लगे, हमेशा पसंद आए, उससे हम कभी बोर नहीं होते. That is called sublime, sublimity. So हमारा एक प्रश्न है आपको समझाने के लिए बच्चों कि why poetry is beautiful and on the other hand it is sublime. The answer to it, students, is that it is created with the most attentive instances. हम बहुत attentive होते हैं students, and we have minds which are, it is primary or it is secondary imagination. Primary oblique secondary. This is important. Our mind is very attentive in 2 things. The first is whether it is primary or secondary imagination. And it's appealing because most of the poems are meant to be read by the others. ज़्यादातर जो poems होती हैं वो कौन पढ़ते हैं? दूसरे पढ़ते हैं. All over world students पढ़ते हैं. And that is why the primary and the secondary imagination is important and why it has to be very attentive while writing. And yes, it also expresses emotion. It also expresses emotion. And a lot of writings forms expression. They form, they express a lot of emotion. लेकिन poetry के साथ क्या होता है? It seems to go deeper into your heart. It goes deeper into your mind and heart and soul. And poetry seems to come out with more emotions compared to the other genres of literature. पोइट्री हमारे दिल के बहुत नजदीक होती है. पोइट्री के साथ हम जुड़ जाते हैं. पोइट्री कहते हैं it is something like reaching God. And basically these are the reasons why it is also one of my favorite genres when it comes to teaching poetry. And yes, poetry is also beautiful, also sublime, because it can mean anything. And with such minimal writing, means कि poetry में जो language होती है बच्चों वो condensed होती है. It is not an essay, it is not a drama, it is not a scripted. It has a minimum writing, and those minimum words can mean anything because it is a expression of words. And this can be be related to so many minds, so many emotions, to so many people. And one person can have one perspective for the poem while other can mean it completely different. So it is the beauty of the poem that the people can understand with different layers of meaning. And poetry, as we are discussing about its beauty and sublimity, it always plays on words. It plays on sounds, onomatopoeia. जो हम सुनते हैं हमें अच्छा लगता है, उसके वर्ड्स, उसमें म्यूजिक, उसमें रिदम, उसका कनोटेशन, उसका refrain. There are so many things which are embedded while a poet is writing poetry. And students, it is also very amazing that how some intricate words and sounds can be used, can be flowed in a piece of poetry. And the rhythm, the rhyme really makes a piece of poetry stand out. And we all know that there have been great poets like Wordsworth, Keats, Shelley, Byron, Chaucer, Spenser, Milton, and all these great poets have written great poetry. And in ancient times, poetry is always considered by the ancient poets that they are nearer to God. And poetry, according to Philip Sidney, is also considered as an art of imitation. कि हम imitate करते हैं. And we all know that in the words of a great poet, nature poet, prophet of nature, William Wordsworth, वो क्या कहता है बच्चों? आप सबको पता होगा. Poetry is the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. And it takes its origin from the emotions recollected in tranquility. ट्रैंक्विलिटी का मतलब समझते हैं बच्चों? शांत में, शांति की जगह पे. इसीलिए वर्ड्सवर्थ अपनी सिस्टर डोरोथी वर्ड्सवर्थ के साथ रिवर वाई पे गया था अगेन. वाई? जस्ट टू फील दैट सेटिस्फैक्शन, दैट टू फील दैट लोनलीनेस, दैट ट्रैंक्विलिटी, सो दैट ही कैन नर्चर हिज सबकॉन्शियस विद द ब्यूटी ऑफ नेचर. सो नाउ कमिंग टू पोइट्री. अब हम आपको यह बताने की कोशिश करेंगे बच्चों कि पोइट्री क्या है. व्हाट इज पोइट्री? पोइट्री एक कला है, पोइट्री एक आर्ट है. एंड दिस आर्ट विच इज रिटन और स्पोकन इन द रिदमिकल कंपोजिशन. एंड द पर्पस ऑफ पोइट्री इज टू डिस्क्राइब सम ब्यूटिफुल लाइन्स विद blending of the imaginative thoughts. And some poetry is written in verses, and there are many different types and forms of poetry varying with its lines, with its repetition of words, and with its rhyming schemes, with its refrain, with its stanza patterns. And two popular subjects often used in poetry are nature and feelings. 1 and 2. So this is also important. किस प्रकार की हम पोइट्री लिखते हैं? नेचर, and we also express the feelings. Fine. Now, getting into more of the details about poetry, just I'm using the board so that you may be able to connect with your class. The second thing which comes to my mind is, यहाँ पर मैं लिख देता हूँ, types of poetry. Types of poetry. So students, देखिए 3 प्रकार की पोइट्री होती है. And once you excel in the understanding of this class with your course, I am sure you will excel in the interview boards also, because आपका जो nurturing है वो आपके blood में इंग्लिश लिटरेचर आ जाएगा. तो पहला इसमें देखिए ऐसे 3 बना लेते हैं, 1, 2 and 3. The first kind of poetry which you have to remember or read for your course is narrative poetry. Narrative poetry. Then comes the lyric poetry, and then you come with the dramatic poetry. Always remember, in any interviews अगर आपसे कोई पूछते हैं, tell me the types of poetry, you can immediately answer students, narrative, lyric and dramatic. Now, the second step is that you have to also know what is narrative poetry, types of narrative poetry, types of lyric poetry and types of dramatic poetry. So, in the narrative poetry, I think I will explain it here. Narrative poetry में there are different types of narrative poetry. The first is the epic, the second is the ballad, the third is the monologue, you can write it down, and the fourth is the metrical romance. So these are the four kinds of poetry under the section of narrative poetry. Now the second is जो मैंने आपको बताया था लिरिक. लिरिक में कितने प्रकार के होते हैं? वेरी सिंपल, एलिजी, ओड एंड सोनेट. एलिजी, ओड एंड सोनेट. Why I am giving you these details? Because you have to focus on each of the things for your course curriculum, and it is very important when you have to teach in your further classes when you become a teacher. Fine, तो ये हो गया lyric, and the last is narrative, lyric, and the last is dramatic. अब dramatic के अंदर में क्या क्या आएगा स्टूडेंट्स? पहला आता है ट्रेजिडी, दूसरा आपको आता है कॉमेडी, थर्ड क्या आएगा? ट्रेजी कॉमेडी. सोचते जाइए और क्या आ सकता है? ट्रेजी कॉमेडी. नेक्स्ट क्या आएगा? बता सकता है कोई? क्लोज्ड ड्रामा. एंड द लास्ट इज masked, M-A-S-Q-U-E. So these are the three types of poetry which has been discussed with you in details. To explain you here in the bifurcation types मैंने आपको explain कर दिया. Now further it is also very important for me to explain you some of the kinds in detail, otherwise you will not be able to understand its deeper meaning. For example, I would like to explain you what is narrative poetry. Fine. See, narrative poetry में क्या होता है कि इसमें एक ऐसी कहानी होती है, it has a story with a plot, it has a story with a plot, with characters. It has a plot, it has characters, and it has a setting. Always remember, whenever you are asked, student, tell me what is narrative poetry, you can immediately say that narrative poetry is that poetry which has a story with a plot, with the characters, and with a setting. And the loftiest form of narrative poetry, जो सबसे magnitude, सबसे ऊंचा प्रकार का नैरेटिव पोइट्री अगर कोई होती है, सो दैट इज नोन एज एपिक. उसको एपिक कहते हैं. और एपिक किस में डील करता है? एपिक डील्स विद गॉड्स एंड गॉडेसेस. इट डील्स विद गॉड्स एंड गॉडेसेस. फाइन. एंड एपिक इज नोन फॉर इट्स मैजेस्टिक ब्यूटी. And that beauty, because of its majesty, is to be seen in the theme, in the style, and a long narrative poem tells us about the feasts of the gods, of the heroes, and especially these epics, which are known as the epic or the narrative poetry, deals with the historical events, of the national events, of the legendary and the universal significance. मतलब जो कहानी होती है, जो हिस्टोरिक फिगर्स होते हैं, जो लीजेंडरी कैरेक्टर्स होते हैं, उनका एक यूनिवर्सल सिग्निफिकेंस होता है, उनको दुनिया में सब लोग जानते हैं उस कहानी को. एंड इट हैज़ अ लॉट ऑफ ग्रैंडर, अ मैजेस्टी. तभी वो नैरेटिव पोइट्री होती है, तभी वो एपिक होती है. एंड यस, I should not forget to tell you that most of the epics deal with the exploits of one single individual. जितने भी ये एपिक्स होते हैं जनरली उन एक सिंगल इंडिविजुअल जिनका नाम बहुत होता है उसके ऊपर, उनके एक्सप्लॉइट्स पे ये डिपेंड करते हैं. एंड व्हाई दीज एपिक्स are known for one single individual. The reason is that the writer or the poet believes in the unity of composition. कंपोजिशन में यूनिटी तभी आती है जब उसमें सेवरल कैरेक्टर्स का मिंगलिंग नहीं होता है. फाइन. सो टिपिकली वी कैन से दैट एन एपिक इंक्लूड्स with several features, and we will also find the introduction of the supernatural forces, and those supernatural forces, they shape the action. We also find some conflicts in the form of the battles, sometimes some physical combat, and sometimes some stylistic conventions. And don't forget invocation, muse. This is very important. अगर आप पैराडाइज लॉस्ट भी देखिएगा तो आपको invocation to the muse आपको मिलेगा. And there is also a long list of the protagonists which are involved in the epical poetry, and thereby the epical style becomes full of magnitude, full of elevated thoughts and elevated language. And in English literature, we find but one poem which is truly deserving the name of epic, magnum opus, truly deserved by no other but John Milton, and that is Paradise Lost. And apart from this type of lyric epical poetry, that is narrative poetry, जिसमें एक epic एक form होता है, इसी प्रकार से एक और form होता है जिसको हम कहते हैं fairy lore, and it appears as the theatrical romance, which is much more simpler in form but comprises the story of life in the ordinary circumstances and is generally termed mythical tale. So ये उतना important नहीं है लेकिन जानना जरूरी है. Now, narrative poetry में थर्ड टाइप का आता है जो मैंने आपको उसमें दिखाया भी था, ballad. And what is a ballad, students? कोई पूछे आपसे तो आप बता सकते हैं कि सबसे छोटा फॉर्म, the briefest form is a single incident from a life is called a ballad, and it is a song like narrative. गीत की तरह ही एक नैरेटिव होता है जिसमें स्टैंजाज होते हैं और एक सबसे इंपॉर्टेंट होता है बैलेड में रिफ्रेन. इट इज नोन फॉर इज स्टैंजाज एंड रिफ्रेन, एंड मोस्ट ऑफ द फैसिनेटिंग टेल्स आर इन द फॉर्म ऑफ बैलेड्स. जितने भी आप टेल्स देखते हैं जो हमें बहुत फैसिनेट करते हैं वो हमेशा आप देखेंगे कि बैलेड के फॉर्म में लिखा हुआ है. एंड स्टूडेंट्स, इन द 18th century, 18वीं शताब्दी में जब हमने देखा कि देयर वाज अ रिवाइवल ऑफ इंटरेस्ट इन द अर्लियर टाइम्स, 18th century में पुराने समय पे लोग चले गए, उनमें ज्यादा इंटरेस्ट आने लगा. तो ये जो बैलेड्स था which were admired long back because of their simplicity, because of their wonderfulness and because of their dramatic power, they again people started admiring, and the best example which can be told to you is no other than but S.T. Coleridge's Rime of the Ancient Mariner. Coleridge's Rime of the Ancient Mariner, one of the most wonderful ballads written by a great poet, S.T. Coleridge. Now we come to lyric poetry. What is lyric poetry? वैसे तो आप सभी जानते होंगे, लेकिन once you have to explain or write, it becomes difficult because maybe the concept is not clear. सबसे पहले बच्चों ये याद रखिए कि लिरिक पोएम हमेशा एक शॉर्ट होती है, छोटी कविता होती है, एंड विच इज हाईली म्यूजिकल, बहुत म्यूजिक उसके अंदर होता है, बहुत मेलोडी होती है, साउंड होता है, और ऐसा वर्स होता है विच ऑलवेज इज गोइंग टू कन्वे पावरफुल फीलिंग्स. A lyric poem will always convey powerful feelings, and the poet may use rhyme, may use meter, rhyme इस्तेमाल कर सकता है, meter इस्तेमाल कर सकता है. There are so many other literary devices which can also be used, and all these things are used to create a song-like quality. And do remember that lyric poetry is very unlike of the narrative poetry which I have discussed before. And lyric poetry doesn't have to tell a story. A lyric poem is basically a private expression of emotion by a single speaker. हमारे मन में, हमारे हृदय में कोई दुख है, कोई सुख है, हमें अपना इमोशन बताना है, लिखना है. सो दैट इज अ सिंगल आइडेंटिटी एंड एक्सप्रेशन ऑफ अ इमोशन बाय अ सिंगल पर्सन फॉर समवन. जैसे फॉर एग्जांपल हम बता सकते हैं, अगर आपने नाम सुना हो, अमेरिकन पोएट है एक बहुत बड़ी जिसका नाम है एमिली डिकिंसन. एमिली डिकिंसन का नाम आपने सुना होगा. Emily Dickinson, she's a great poet, a lady poet who has written so many lyrical poems, so many lyric poetry, because it is known for one single speaker. So she has collected all her emotions of grief, of sadness, of love or happiness in those collection of poems. And yes, lyric poetry के बारे में हम आपको एक चीज और बता दें कि lyric poetry हमेशा 4 कैटेगरी में फॉल करती है. इट फॉल्स इनटू 4 कैटेगरीज, दैट इज सॉन्ग्स, एलिजीज, ओड्स एंड सॉनेट्स. सॉन्ग्स, एलिजीज, ओड्स एंड सॉनेट्स, ये हो गई आपकी लिरिक पोइट्री. ठीक है. एंड दीज आर द थिंग्स ड्यू टू विच द पोएट expresses the feelings of a single speaker, and lyrics are also the most common type of poem in even modern literature. आज modern literature में भी आज हम इतना आगे आ गए, फिर भी lyric poetry हमेशा सभी poets की नंबर 1 पसंदीदा poetry होती है. And if we talk about lyric poetry in detail, elegies, जैसा मैंने आपको बताया भी, elegies, odes, sonnets, etc. तो elegies and odes especially are written in elaboration, in structure, और जो उनका subject होता है, the subject taken in those elegies and odes are lot weighing, means उसके अंदर बहुत weight होता है. वो ऐसे ही नहीं होती है कि कुछ भी उठाया लिख दिया. They have some weight, they have some significance. And if I talk about elegy, the elegy deals with death. Either in, you can say, general or some particular individual. In English literature, we find so many elegies written by the great poets. And if I talk about the odes are usually in praise of some person or something. And the elegy commonly is defined as a meditative poem of some sorrowful theme. Usually we lament the dead person. And the best example representing by John Milton's Lycidas. Milton's Lycidas. This is a great elegy. And Thomas Gray's elegy written in a country churchyard. Now, the last section which we are going to discuss is dramatic poetry. Dramatic poetry, देखिए, 2 क्लासेस ऑफ ट्रेजेडी एंड कॉमेडी में विभाजित होती है. बेसिकली ट्रेजेडी एंड कॉमेडी. एंड दिस क्लास ऑफ बाइफर्केशन is supplemented by other minor variations as well, and those bifurcations and variations are of farce, then we have the mask, then we have the morality play, then we have the miracle play, mystery play, miracle play, then we have the mystery play, and then we have the interludes, and last but not least is the opera. And dramatic poetry tells a story using a character's own thoughts or some spoken statement. So I hope students, you must be well aware now and you are ready now to face things in this field of English literature, because the concepts has to be very clear. Now we come back to poetry again, कि आपको पोइट्री में क्या क्या चीजें जानने की जरूरत है, because we are taking today the poetry session in forms of literature. See, the points which you have to remember under the section of poetry is कि poetry में sounds, meanings of words are combined to form some thoughts, ideas, feelings and emotions. And poetry is usually written in lines, and the various elements of poetry are rhythm, sound, imagery, that is pictorial quality, its forms and its types. There are classical poems also who show the images, and those images leave the readers awestruck with its splendor, with its beauty, with its majesty, with its classical fervor. And poetry is also an attempt, basically attempt नहीं है बल्कि इसको कह सकते हैं literary attempt, साहित्यिक attempt है to share some of the personal experiences and feelings. And poetry, to write poetry is not a joke. Everybody cannot write poetry. Why cannot write everybody? Because it requires, I will write it down, it requires creativity. हमारे अंदर creativity होनी चाहिए तभी हम poetry लिख सकते हैं. We should have creativity, we should have emotion also, and we should have artistic essence, कलात्मक, and even logic. So these are the things which are needed to write poetry.